Hello, and welcome to Proteges, where we address real life topics from a godly perspective. I am your host, Travis Johnson. Today is a special show, as I will be sharing my life story with you. But before I share my life with you, please like and subscribe to my channel. You don't want to miss out on any more content going forward. Let's get started. On my first episode of Proteges, I mentioned a little bit about my life and upbringing that so many were intrigued on. People asked questions and wanted me to share my life story, so I want to oblige you and share a little bit more about my life. I believe that explaining my life story to you will help you understand more about who I am and why I started Proteges. You might find it amazing that I can recall so much of my life, even from age 2. I will tell you that I can remember so much because of the trauma that I experienced. A lot of my life is just unbelievable at times, and I cannot believe that I am where I am today. I was born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee. My mother, twin sister, and myself lived in the projects in Section 8 housing called Walter Simmons. It was riddled with drugs and violence. My biological father never married my mother, so according to my mother, he left when my sister and I were 4 months. So, it was just my mother and us. We were impoverished and lived on government aid and received welfare. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath apartment complex. My mother worked, but I don't remember where. What I do remember is that we had very little. Me and my twin sister slept on a single mattress for years. We ate beanie weenies a lot. One of the highlights, and I still remember unto this very day, is what was called government cheese. It was the hardest cheese in the world to cut. It was a long and rectangular block, but it was good and made the best grilled cheese sandwiches ever. One of the most traumatic things I remember is hearing my mother being physically assaulted while me and my sister were upstairs lying on our mattress. It sounded like she was in the kitchen being hit and thrown against the counters and table. My sister and I were only 2. There is nothing like being young and hearing your mother yelling and screaming as she is being beat upon. When the screaming and banging stopped, my mother just came upstairs into the room and laid down with me and my sister, crying and holding us. This man, who was my mother's boyfriend, then came up to the room and opened the door and looked at my mother and then left. Thank God he left. I never forgot that. It hurts me just thinking about it. My mother was so defenseless and he knew it. I'm glad that man left and didn't do anything to my sister and me. I can remember my mother holding me on her right hip as mothers do in the same apartment complex. I remember what happened. Someone shot a gun in my mother's direction and she ducked. Thank God she did, because the bullet went past both our heads. I remember reminding my mother about that story just 20 years ago and she broke down in tears. Can you imagine that happening to you? I wish I could say it ended there, but it did not. My sister and I were babysat by friends of my mother in the same apartment complex. This is where my sister and I were sexualized. My mother may hear this and be shocked that these people were not watching us at all. The babysitter's younger brother was 8 years old and had a sister my sister and I's age. We were 5 at the time. He would be with my sister and I would be with his younger sister. We were doing things we should not have even known about. This happened every time we were babysit by this girl. My mother would definitely know who I am talking about. There were other guys who took advantage of my sister and I, and my mother would feel so awful if she knew this right now. I remember so many times These things happened to us, but all the more to my sister, my poor sister. We were so abused and were not even 6. This is hard to even share with you. We should not have even known about this, but more importantly, we should not have experienced this. It was horrible. In those same apartment complexes, I saw men shot and wars between mine and another apartment complex. It was insane. But God was good to have people come to our environment and pick us up to take us to Bible camps. We loved the church bus. It was always white Christians that came in and picked us up every Saturday in the summer. But we had to come back to that horrible place and face the realities of struggle, crime, and violence. My sister and I were bullied every day as we walked to school. We attended Goodlet Elementary. I hated walking and attending school because we were bullied on the way home as well. We were so afraid to tell our parents out of fear of what was worse that could have happened to us. The bright days were visiting my maternal grandparents because that meant seeing my granddad, who was the best granddad ever. He was the most gentle and loving man I knew. He was an Army veteran. He received a Purple Heart for being wounded in combat. He fought in the war of Vietnam. He was so faithful, and he was a lover of his wife. He didn't get the GI Bill, but he always endured hard times gracefully. He would never complain. He would always greet me and my twin sister with a kiss. I still remember the feel of his love today. He wore this cologne that I cannot forget the smell of, but I haven't ever known the name. If I smell it, I just think of him and get all teary-eyed. He knew my elementary teachers. He knew Mrs. Pratcher. And if I ever got in trouble, I had to face him whenever we went to visit. I couldn't get away with anything. One thing Granddad taught me, he said to me, one day, don't ever neglect your responsibilities as a husband and father. Your family is your responsibility. You cannot blame the white man or anyone else. He would say, I have been faithful to your grandmother, and you better do the same. I was only 5, but I remember him saying that. He got old and senile and just wasn't coherent anymore. Then he died when I was 15 years old. I miss him so much. I really miss him. Grandpa Casey Johnson will never be forgotten. Never. Then my mother's boyfriend moved in, and he was not a good man to my mother. He was abusive repeatedly. But his mother was a Christian. We would spend the night at our house, and she would have us read the Bible and remember chapters out of the book of Psalms. I still remember chapters of the scriptures because of her. Undoubtedly, she plays a major role in why I am a Christian today. A lot of the Psalms are planted in my heart. She would be the one reading it to us and forcing us to remember the words. Like Psalm 1. And it says, Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. And all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. And Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That was her impact on me. I didn't realize how God will use it in my life. I will get back to her impact in my life in a little bit. When we were about to turn 6, we moved into my stepfather's mother's house at 730 Lifford. So we moved from the projects to the neighborhood, Binghampton. All I knew there in my stepmother's house was physical violence, drugs, and alcoholism. And then there was my older cousins that smoked marijuana and sold crack cocaine and marijuana. As the new kids on the block, my sister and I were bullied and jumped daily. We were teased and had to fight almost every day for an entire year. This is where I learned to fight and stick up for myself. I was an angry kid and I fought a lot. I had to become tough, and so I did. I was not one to run from a fight. I lost 1 or 2 fights and I was full of rage. I didn't trust people and I would always throw the first punch because I was skinny and I wanted to hurt someone before they hurt me. I went to juvenile for being something of a watchdog for a friend burglarizing a shop. And then I went again for possession of marijuana. I was running headlong into destruction. What kept me from a life of crime was basketball. The first time I saw and touched a basketball, I loved it. I would dribble and shoot every day, all day if I could. It was my older cousins who gave me a love for it. I had to grow in my skills to play with them. They were 9 years older than me and would not let me play, so I worked tirelessly until I was better than all of them at age 13. They were busy selling drugs that I surpassed them quickly because of the amount of time I put into practice. When I left elementary school at Shady Grove Elementary, it was heartbreaking. I felt loved there at that school. This was the school I spoke of in the first show. I have some of my best memories of my childhood because of attending that school. I will never forget the school and still communicate with some of my teachers today. I wept when I had to leave Shady Grove. The teachers seemed to really care about me there. I know a lot of them did. They prayed for me, and I found out later how. Because I visited after graduating high school and found out that they were Christians and that they had been praying for me all along. Mrs. Hood, who was my second grade teacher, was hard on me, but she was very loving as well. I know I got on her last nerve, but she persisted in caring about me as a student and a kid. Then I transitioned to 7th grade at Treadwell High School. Middle school is where my eyes were even more open to what was really going on around me. My older cousins and their friends sold drugs and smoked marijuana in my home with my mother and her boyfriend who became her husband. These were the men I began taking my way of life from. They were all about sex, selling drugs, the freshest clothes, and sports. I learned how to live street smart, which is not smart at all. I learned that women were only made for pleasure and that I was supposed to sleep with as many girls as I could before I was 13. I was told not to care about women. So I played basketball and wanted the women. I spent more time outside trying to become a better basketball player than anyone in my neighborhood. I did gain the status of best in the neighborhood, but not in middle school. My middle school teammates were so much more advanced than me due to the access to the facilities and great competition. So I just worked and worked for hours and hours. I didn't care about anything else but basketball. I then became the best all-around basketball player because I could do everything on the court. Soon, I became popular by hanging around with a popular group of guys. They all played basketball. I was catching up and eventually caught up. I was a lockdown defender, an excellent alley-oop catcher, a solid at footwork, solid post game, and solid at mid-range. Then the girls came, and I was just playing basketball and girls. It was a game to play with girls, and I just played it. I was taught enough of the game from my cousins, and basketball gave me a grand advantage with the girls. I took every advantage of it, and for 2 years, I was so lost in the world of sports, sex, popularity. I ate it up like junk food. I forgot my grandfather's words. I am so grateful for these men, Isaac Little, Wesley Sincor, Brian Miles, who I spoke of in my first episode. But there were others: Mike Smith, Tom Clifton, Steve Noblet, Jerry Clayton, Brent Chapman, Jim Kennedy, and Mark Correa. All these men and their families were so important in my life as a new Christian. But before they came into my life, I was out of control. I was a hothead. I fought so much, I had to play tough. But inwardly, I was so afraid of fighting. I never bothered anyone. But if someone said anything or looked at me in a certain way, I was taught to handle that. On the basketball court, I was even worse. Most of my fights happened there, mostly in pickup ball, but it was my first love, and I hated to be disrespected there. I put in so much work there, and no one was going to talk crazy or make me feel like I was beneath them. My mouth got me in so much trouble on the court that it spilled over off the court. I almost got killed by a whole neighborhood of gangster disciples for an altercation on the basketball court. Then again, by a neighborhood called Mitchell Heights, I couldn't keep my rage under control and just got worse. Should have just let words be words. I had to talk and defend myself. I was not wise. These guys were people I knew, but they were either in gangs or in a clique that I was not in. Both times the Lord saved me. I was popular enough that the girls who didn't know I was horrible to girls rescued me by confronting the guys enough about calling the police that they turned all their attention to them. And I was able to slip away. Obviously, it was the Lord who saved me through those girls. All this happened when I was just 16. I was a horrible student with little parental involvement. My mother just couldn't keep up with me. She had to work, and I was still sneaky enough to make her think well of me, but I was horrible. My life was headed to destruction, and I was on my way to hell. I couldn't read until I was in the 11th grade. I failed the 8th and the 11th grade and didn't graduate till I was 20 years old. Death of one of my brothers when I was 8 and another when I was 16 was crazy. Then a lot of my friends were going to jail and others were dying while others started selling drugs. While all of this was happening, the Lord was sending his servants to find the lost. Isaac Little, some old women in each of my neighborhoods that I lived in, and friends like Derek Reed, Mario Holman, who had been saved through Isaac's ministry, came after me. Right as I was about to jump over the cliff, the Lord saved my life. It was at a camp called Victory Valley that I was saved. It was the end of August of 1998. My life would never be the same. The Lord was faithful and gracious to redeem me. I heard the gospel and believed on Christ Jesus, my Lord. I thank God for Jesus Christ. He came right on time. My eyes were now open to the truth my stepfather's mother walked in. I would spend so much time reading the Bible with Isaac and Kenny Pendleton that I learned how to read. But I was so far behind in school from skipping and just being passed that I graduated at 20 years old. I am grateful to Tom and Whitney Clifton for fostering me as I was in not a good place with my mother and had no place to go at 16. My poor mother worked so hard to provide. She worked 3 jobs. And 3 jobs is not easy for anyone. And I hurt for her. I'm so grateful my mother made the right decision to allow me to be in custody of another family. Later, Mike and Suzanne adopted me into their family. I had grown up so much due to their parenting and discipleship. Their example of love, grace, and mercy compelled me even more to follow Jesus and live a life for his glory. They loved this poor 17-year-old and allowed me into their home way before they adopted me. I wanted to meet a wife like Mom, like Suzanne. I wanted someone who was of high character and integrity, gentle and quiet in spirit, and loved God more than anything else. And that's exactly what the Lord gave me. I was able to get into Lindenwood University and walk onto the basketball team. It was awesome to do that. Then I ended up jumping into sin and fornication with 2 girls during my time at Lindenwood. But the Lord delivered me from those relationships and that sin. The worst thing about the sin was it provided me with no security of my salvation. It caused me so much pain and I just couldn't see straight. But God is faithful. He truly restored me. He then set me ablaze for him more than ever before. As I always wanted to see people come to know the Lord Jesus Christ and to be reconciled to God the Father. The Lord, by his Spirit's power, gave me young men to pour into. I was leading a ministry on the campus of Lindenwood, and the church pews were being filled and the waters of baptism was overflowing. It was so amazingly awesome to see the Lord at work. Then the Lord introduced me to my wife, my last semester of my undergraduate degree. I met Morgan Ariel Brown, who played volleyball for the Lindenwood Lady Lions. She then became Morgan Johnson. I wanted to spend a little bit more time with her, so I started a Bible study. Now, Bible study was something I did regularly every year. So what I did was I invited a lot of people with hopes of having her come so that I can get to know her. And then a special thing happened. She came, but only she came. Nobody else showed up. So I was able to spend a lot of time with her alone in a public area on campus in the Spelman Center. We read through chapters 1 and 2 of Romans, and we did a line by line study on each. And that time that we spent together was awesome. I got to see her crane for more knowledge and wisdom of the scriptures. And I knew, man, she really loves God. And so that time that we spent there was awesome. And then we went outside and we stayed up to like 3 o'clock in the morning, just talking about life, about what we wanted in life, about what we wanted in family, and how we wanted to raise a godly family in the fear and admonition of the Lord. And I asked her if I can talk to her father some days later, and she asked why. And I said, well, I just want to tell him what a wonderful job he did in raising you. And she was like, no. And I was like, 2 days later, I asked, well, can I talk to your father? Can I call him? And she said, why? And I kind of gave the same weak answer, and she was like, no. So then I asked again, the 3rd time, and she asked, well, why do you want to talk to my father? And I said, well, I don't want to tell you before I tell your father that I like you. I just want to let him know, and then him give me permission, and then we go from there. Well, she said, well, I tell you what, Wait till I tell you can call, but here's his number. So she gave me his number, and then I called her father and basically asked for permission to court his daughter with the intent of marriage. And he gave me his blessing. And so we pursued each other, and it was awesome. It was awesome to be able to have a relationship with her. 6 weeks in, I bought a ring. And then when I graduated, we drove down to the Valley. She's from the Valley, and I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. It was a 21-hour drive to the Valley, but it was 24 hours for us. Got there that night. I asked for permission to marry her. Her father and her mother both said that you guys are adults. You can make that decision. So we waited 6 more months because they didn't think that she was quite ready. So I waited 6 months, and I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. And the rest is history. We got married, and we have 5 beautiful kids now, and we're just following the Lord. Which leads me to, why did I start Proteges? How did I get the idea to start it? Well, Proteges was birthed out of a place of hurt for disunity in the church around social issues like Black Lives Matter, social justice, evil done to me on my jobs, and other hurtful things. I experienced things from so-called Christian organizations that I feel would become more and more common. And Christians need to be prepared and understand that this earth is not our home. So why Proteges? Proteges can speak to topics that need to be addressed. Controversial topics need to be addressed with grace and truth in the spirit of gentleness. So what are Proteges? Well, Proteges are guided and supported by someone older and much wiser and experienced or influential. And in a Christian's case, who better than Jesus to be led and taught of or taught by? He is the one true God in the exact representation of God. He is both Savior and Lord. He died for sinners and longs that all will come unto him and be found by him and have eternal security with him, thereby becoming Proteges. So I am committed to serving you with content that is both God-honoring and encouraging as you walk and live life on this earth. I do not want to live on this earth and not use my voice for God, Christians, and others who are on the verge of salvation had someone spoken up. This is me, and this is my life, and this is why I do what I do. Thanks for taking the time to tune into Proteges and listen to my story. I hope this time was helpful to you. And as always, please like, subscribe, and share this video with as many of your friends and family as you can. And until next time, go and be Proteges while in this world. Grace and peace.